Welcome and thanks for spending the evening with us. What we'll be talking about tonight is how to navigate the job market in the current climate. And my name is Paula Doyle. I'm at the University of Rochester, and I'll be moderating this. Joining us tonight are Dr. Pat Culligan, Dr. Jessica Zigman, and Dr. Mitch Schuster. And what I'm going to do is have each of them introduce themselves a little bit, and then we can get on with the lecture. And I wanted to let the fellows know that at the bottom of the screen, there's a question and answer section. And if you have questions along the way, type the question in and I'll be taking notes. And then after the presentations, I can read out some of your questions for you. So why don't we get started? Pat, do you want to get started introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Pat Culligan. I am still the program director, fellowship program director at Weill Cornell Department of Urology, the FPMRS program. But, and it's apropos to this talk, I've recently changed jobs. So I decided to simplify my life, be around my family more, and kind of step away from academics. So I'm going to be, and am, working at a community hospital in Jersey, closer to my house, called Valley Hospital, with someone I used to work with. Her name's Christina Saiz, and we're great colleagues. And I'm still part-time at Cornell while they're looking for my replacement. And this is something that I decided pre-COVID, but COVID made it seem even that much more of a fit for my life. So, but I'm operating all day at Cornell tomorrow, so I'm sort of at both places right now, but that's where I am.
All right, Mitch?
I'm Mitch Schuster. I'm a urogynecologist/gynecologist. I'm actually in private practice and have been in the same group now for about 27, 28 years. I'm in a group of 9, 10, 10 to 12, kind of depends on how things are going. Generalist. They send all the Urogyn to me. I'm adjunct staff with UAB, and I work with fellows for robotic cases just to get case numbers up and things like that. I'm a coding chair for AUGS, and I also work as the RUC advisor for ACOG and do a lot of work with American College of Surgeons also in terms of negotiating reimbursements and that kind of stuff.
So in case you don't know what all that means, there's no better expert on the subjects he just said than Mitch.
Jessica?
Thank you, Pat.
Hi, I'm Jessica Zigman. I am a more recent grad, so I don't have 20 plus years of experience, but I'm in my second year after fellowship. I'm in private practice in a large group. There are 2 Urogyns in our group, but there are about 1,100 other physicians in the multi-specialty group. So we have a large referral base. And I'm in the San Francisco area at the Palo Alto Medical Foundation.
All right, so to get started on our topic, Pat and Mitch, do you want to present your slides?
Go ahead, Pat. Yeah.
So for the last few years at AUGS, I've done a breakout session, and these are the slides from last year, and a lot of them, are sort of universal. So we'll get started going through some of these, and then I've also interspersed slides that Mitch made, and those are on the AUGS background. So it'll be 2 different backgrounds on this, but we're both going to be talking. All 3 of us can be talking on really any slide, so we can get started. So the first thing to think about, I think, is what sort of a practice model. I've trained fellows for a long time, and I've had a couple of fellows just go straight into private practice. And it was a very, very viable option as long as you were willing to work hard and keep expenses low until you were making enough money. I think it's a pretty risky thing to do right now. I think the climate is so risky that probably I'm unless you had a special situation, that might be tough. Joining a private practice is another way to go. A lot of the deals that I see, I look at a lot of people's contracts for them. I'm not a lawyer or anything, but I've seen a lot of contracts, so I have advice that I'm happy to give. And so a lot of these contracts where you're joining a private practice, the owner is going to basically be paying you out of their pocket until you're making your own money. And a lot of times the hospital where that practitioner works will make them whole for a time period, maybe 2 years or something like that, for however much they're in the hole by paying the new partner. And then there's always a question of how partnership happens. There's being a hospital employee, which I am, is probably the most common, I would think. And then joining a large multi-specialty group, a large urology practice is kind of common these days, or a large OBGYN group. I can't think of too many other ways to go. And Mitch's point is right here. Employed physicians outnumber ownership stake physicians by a lot. And that's especially in the last few years, don't you think, Mitch?
Yes, absolutely. It was the other way around till about 2018, and then it kind of flipped the other direction. But it's kind of slowing also now, Pat. I think people are starting to realize there is a little bit more of a financial incentive if you're willing to take the risk.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've always sort of admired and thought about the idea of being in private practice, but it's just every year I do a self-assessment as, what am I thinking about? What's worth it to me? And it's always sort of made more sense to do what I've done, but I really admire those of you in private practice. I would say one of the first things you should do, and this is sort of obvious, is to work on your CV. But when I say work on your CV, there's a little few tricks you can do. If there's a few jobs that you're really looking for, you might actually try to find the CV of those potential bosses and kind of copy their format and make it look familiar, kind of imitate them. You can always adapt your CV to fit specific jobs because as you learn about positions, you can figure out what what they value and highlight that more on your CV. And then I think this is a key one. Have a non-medical business person read your CV because they're going to look at it with a totally different eye because they don't know what's what, and they're going to ask you questions that nobody else is going to ask you. And sometimes you can avoid that way leaving off major accomplishments or not including silly things that might be cool to you but don't mean anything to anybody. So I see the most common mistake I see is people leaving off major accomplishments, maybe putting them at the bottom or hiding them in a way or referring to something that's a really major accomplishment just by the name of it without an explanation, assuming that other people might know what that is. So what do you guys think about this?
I would agree with that completely. I do think getting a business-minded person to look at the CV, because when you go into practice, whether it's employed or not, you're practicing medicine, but you're also running a business. And so I think that's a great idea, Pat. I really do. Jessica,
yeah. And I have a question on this slide. Someone typed in, how do you find your your potential boss's CV? Is there some tricks for doing that?
I mean, the easiest way is so many places people post their CVs one place or another on the website of their organization. Or, just get smart with a Google search. I'm sure everybody that's attending this talk can do it better than I could do it.
I agree. I also had a few non-medical people look over my CV. They all had different things that they sort of pointed out, and I incorporated those changes.
Yeah, that's good, because a lot of non-medical people are going to look at your CV if they're really getting serious about hiring you. Then the higher ups that are, business people in the hospital will look at it, and you'll stand out if you do these things, I think.
Absolutely.
Another question I get a lot is, should you use one of these headhunters? And I mean, I'm really interested to hear what Mitch might say about this, but I feel like it's sort of like hiring a realtor. They're really only interested in jobs where they're going to get paid. The employer ultimately pays them, but so if you get somebody that says, I'm looking out for you, this is the recruiter talking to you, really they're just looking to put you in a job that where they're going to get paid. They're not going to help you find a job where they're not going to get paid. And so you just need to remember that they get paid a lot. Sometimes I've heard as much as half the first year salary for the person that's going in. So I don't find these people super helpful. I think people who do have more of a lined up interests, believe it or not, can be, instead of a headhunter, they can be high up folks at medical device companies, like the regional or national managers, you know, they hear stuff all the time, and they can, and they actually look good to their potential customers if they can sort of take credit for somebody hearing about a job and interviewing there. So that's actually not a bad idea. But headhunters, I don't think are that helpful, unless you guys want to tell me different.
As an employer, being an employer, we've never used a headhunter. And personally, I think the AUGS community, you know, the Eurogun community is small enough that we all kind of know each other still. And I think, you know, if you're out there and you're wanting to get somewhere, you know somebody somewhere that can say, hey, let me check on this, and can do it word of mouth instead of having to go through that and introduce a financial incentive. Jessica, I mean, you just went through this.
I did just go through this a few years ago, and I worked with a few recruiters, and in my experience, it was actually for jobs that were listed, and then instead of talking to someone at the listed position, you had to speak with a recruiter first. And in my experience, they usually didn't know that much about the job. So talking with someone who currently worked there, or someone who had worked there in the past, or other OBGYNs, like general OBGYNs that were in those groups, I thought was more helpful than speaking with a recruiter to gather information. That would be a person that you could get people's CV from, though, if it isn't listed online. And then in large groups, if someone is applying to like a Kaiser type situation, they actually almost exclusively, at least in my experience, or with friends of mine who have applied to Kaiser type programs, work with recruiters. So they are designed, they work just for Kaiser, so they're not filling other positions outside of Kaiser. But if that's what you're looking for, you may be directed to a recruiter for that specific company.
That makes sense. That's a good point.
Yeah, it is.
LinkedIn is very important. I think, at least in the business world, everybody finds their employees on LinkedIn, it seems like these days. So having a good LinkedIn profile that's up to date, which I say that when mine's not up to date. I haven't changed mine yet with my new position, but still, it's a very important tool. Do you agree, Mitch, or not so much in medicine?
Personally, I like LinkedIn. I'm not sure I would ever use it, though, if I was considering a job change. I kind of see it as a little bit more of an upgraded Facebook platform.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
That's just me personally, though. You know.
Yeah.
Do you think it's important to keep that updated, however, because recruiters or headhunters or potential employers may be looking at your LinkedIn to gather more information about you? So I didn't necessarily use it to find the job, but actually mine's not up to date in the last few years either. But I did have it in case people were searching for me.
Yeah, I think that's the baseline. And then as you get out in your career, I've definitely had opportunities come my way for consulting because of what my LinkedIn profile has to say. So that can be useful. This is an important one. I don't know who told me this the first time, but everybody's heard this, right? The job doesn't look for you. It's not a time to be shy. You send your CV to anybody who might be able to help you. And don't be upset if you don't get takers, or if somebody doesn't focus on your email. I mean, I'm guilty. Sometimes I'll get emails and I don't even see it for a couple of days, so send another email. Don't be afraid. Nobody's going to be upset about that. And if someone offers to tell you about the job market in a geographic area, take them up on it. Or if you happen to know somebody's kind of nice in a certain area and is willing to give you the lay of the land in an honest way, then take them up on that. You just never know. You make any kind of connections you can. There's lots of stories like this. I mean, I've had people reach out to me multiple times, and I'll think of something or call somebody and say, hey, you should interview this person, it seems like, and then it turns into a job. So, yeah, I'm sure you have stories yourselves.
Yeah, and I have a question regarding the social media. We were talking about LinkedIn, and one of the questions that came in was, do employers use doximetry profiles?
I haven't figured out what doximity is really good for. What about y'all?
I did not use it in my job search, but I'm not sure if people were searching for me on it. I have an account, but I'm not sure how helpful it was.
I'm the same way as Jessica. It's something that kind of clutters my day sometimes.
Yeah, I don't see how they're in business, honestly. But
Hmm.
Another one is go on interviews. Go on lots of interviews. Go on interviews where you're not even that interested in the job, because you're learning about what the marketplace shows. And don't take any interview for granted, and don't be slack when you're heading there. I mean, you want to really prepare for these things and take them seriously. So like, even if you are pretty sure you don't want a particular job, you might as well understand the market, understand the logistics. You can always learn about how to ask questions and understand how well the employers understand the market. And you might learn a lot about how employers view these positions, when you're on an interview, how to ask about the money. I get that question a lot from fellows that are graduating. How do I ask about the money? And initially, I think the good general way to do it is say something like, how does the compensation model work? That sounds pretty benign, and you don't have to get into specific details about your salary right off the bat. But as soon as they seem serious, if they ask you for a second interview or something like that, then you want to ask for specifics as soon as possible, I think. And if it's getting very serious, a verbal offer should follow by some sort of more formal, non-binding term sheet or an actual contract. And the bottom point I have is just always remember that every potential boss you have is always trying to seek the highest possible compensation for themselves. And so, don't sell yourself short, and don't be shy about trying to make as much money as you possibly can in whatever situation it is.
Pat, I would add to that. You might even want to go on some interviews that you really don't think you want to be in that certain area, just to get good at interviewing, so that when you get to your job that you think this is really where you would like to go, you're a little more seasoned and a little less nervous about it.
Couldn't agree more. How many interviews did you go on, Jessica?
1, 2, 4. But we were very specific in the location that we wanted to be living in. So I'll talk a little bit about this later, but I started the job search a little bit on the earlier sides. We wanted to move to the Bay Area for my husband's job, and he'd been following me around for the last 10 years. So we were pretty specific, and I started the process early and really talked to like anyone in the area who was willing to even return a phone call or email. So I think I went on 4 in-person interviews and then a few second interviews at those places. 5, because I actually interviewed in another location. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
and then
go ahead.
There is a fellow question that kind of goes off of what Jessica was saying. How early in the fellowship do you start interviewing at places?
I would suggest almost, if you know the location that you want to be or the type of practice you're looking for, I would say definitely earlier rather than later. I was on the earlier side, and I would say in times of COVID, when things are maybe leaner, starting earlier is probably a good idea. So I went on my first interview halfway through my second year, which is early.
I would add to that. Sorry, Pat, go ahead.
No, you please go.
I would add to that. If you think about where you're wanting to go, the credentialing process now is turning into a 4-month period of time, and then just getting your numbers available for the insurance carriers. Sometimes that's 4 to 6 months. And so I would say, at least 18 months, maybe. I'm not sure you started too early, Jessica. It sounds like you probably started about the right time.
Right. And one of the follow-up questions to that was, what do you consider early? Your first year, your second year of fellowship? Can you be more specific?
I'd say getting serious.
Go ahead, no, you go.
I was going to say first year is not too early. Towards the end of first year is not too early. Certainly with a year to go, you should be getting real serious. And if you really know where you want to be, like if it's very specific, then I think you really should make it known that you're planning to come to an area. That can change people's mindset if they know that they're either going to be hiring you or competing with you. That sometimes is a motivator for people to interview with you when they might not otherwise.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
I would say that most of so I started the job search early, and I signed my contract of January of my 3rd year, which was pretty typical. So some people I knew signed a little bit before that. Many people I knew signed after that. So there's like a lot of anxiety when you're at SGS or AUGS or other conferences where people are asking like, oh, have you signed a contract yet? And it gets kind of weird because you're competing against friends that you've met through the fellowship process and through interviewing and residency and fellowship. So don't freak out if you don't have a contract by the time these big conferences come about, even if they're virtual. That it was pretty typical for me and for most of my friends to not have a contract signed until like winter or even spring in some occasions before graduation.
Very, very true. We're going to get to that later in this presentation that I have as well, which is, but I'll say it right now, is don't be offended or surprised if a hospital takes months to present you with the physical contract, even after you feel like, and you probably really do have a deal. But we'll get to that a little bit later.
Yeah, I have another question that goes on just what Jessica said, was there's no in-person conferences right now. So networking is a lot harder with COVID going on. And some people are relying more on social media. So how do you suggest networking when you can't do it in person? And then also, how about going outside of AUGS for networking?
Right. Well, some of the things we already mentioned, right? Any kind of connections you can make are good connections. And a lot of people don't think about that industry connection, but when you, if you have the opportunity to run into some of these folks that are, national directors of this or that, and you have a chance, you can always throw it out there. Because again, they're going to look good if they wind up being the person that supplied a lead, that was a real lead. So why not? That's another way to get outside of AUGS with it. And then if you know a specific area, it's not too hard to just sort of, again, back to LinkedIn, figure out the players at the hospital or go on the website to do that and just reach out to them. You can, in some ways it's harder, but in some ways it's easier too, to do interviewing, because before the expectation was if anybody's serious, they're going to show up. But now you can have an interview anytime you want because everything's virtual. So take advantage of that.
Yeah, I would add, if you have a specific area in mind, if you want to go back home to a city, just go online and Google the facilities in that area and find out, are they offering your services already? And then you can just, then start kind of easing into figuring out who's in charge of the physician network for that area. And I mean, if you do that, you can kind of get in and like Pat said, just say, hey, I want to come back to this area. Are you interested? And just don't be afraid to do it. I mean, the worst case scenario is they'll say no.
Yeah. And then this slide that I pulled up is just kind of obvious, but kind of not. You want to make sure that you understand your potential employer's values, especially when you're interfacing with them, but as you're considering whether you want to interface with them. So, and just understand that no matter what they say, clinical collections are going to be the number one thing, the big driver in the front. That's just the way it is. There's no such thing as an ivory tower anymore. But if you're going to be going to a community hospital, which is where I'm working now, that doesn't have, medical students and residents and fellows, then touting your teaching abilities is, not going to resonate with them, or your research. It's all about how you interact with patients, and so just make sure you're messaging correctly for the place that you're going. This is one of Mitch's slides. I'm gonna let you take over on this one.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about all this, the thing that my wife and I did was we basically tried to figure out where are we really going? What are the important things to us? And I think Pat's kind of alluded to it already. He was trying to simplify life in his recent job change. Well, here you are, you're kind of moving out of that educational period into the real world, quote unquote. What are the important things that you're wanting in life? Is it the family time? Is it being near good churches? Is it being near good mountain scenes, being able to snow ski, all those kind of things? Write them down and then get your family members who are going to help make that decision with you, whether it's a wife or, whatever. Get them to write them down and be sure you're all on the same page with that. Find your deal breakers and stick to it. And then Pat's kind of talking about it already, the compensation package. A lot of people are going to talk to you about, well, this is what you make. Or if you just read the advertisements, you can make $380, doing this. you need to understand the package. A lot of times the lower value in terms of the numbers is actually a better package when you see what all is involved. And so they're in the middle of that number 2. Be wary of straight compensation. I've seen more and more people get into a bind where they're making big money that first year or 2, then they're off of that compensation and there's just no patience there. I mean, they're having to move again suddenly. And did you see that kind of stuff, Jessica?
I do. It happened to a few of my general OBGYN friends where their guarantee was like fantastic and they bought cars and houses, and then they realized they had to see like 60 patients a day in order to maintain that salary after the first 2 years. So finding that information out, not in a first interview necessarily, but finding out, is there someone in the finance department or is there a partner that you can talk to about what actual numbers would look like to maintain something similar to the guarantee that sometimes happens in the first few years.
Yeah, I would add one more thing. It's in like the second to last sentence in number 2 there. The only thing worse than treating people differently is treating everyone the same. And when you're in that contract negotiation, you're not the same as someone who might be 20 years older than you and his kids are grown and gone. You know, what's important to you is going to be different, and you've got to kind of stick to your guns on that stuff.
Well, that's the truth. Yeah, there's so much here that's valuable. Let's see. So some things to find out that are probably not negotiable. You just want to find them out. So many places have non-compete clauses that are essentially the same for everybody that's signing a new contract, or probably everybody in the organization. So just understanding what they mean. But there are some devil in the detail type things that come up very often. Under the non-compete clause issue, sometimes a practice or a multi-specialty group especially could have a lot of different offices, and maybe it's not sinister. Maybe they just wrote a contract that wasn't very precise, but if you read it carefully, you might find that you're excluded from practicing if you leave the organization within a 10-mile radius of any of their locations. And if that's the case, you got to have something like that changed, right? So really think through whatever you're signing as far as a non-compete clause. And if it doesn't make sense and it's not fair, then they probably just didn't realize that or hadn't thought about it the way you're thinking about it, because it's just going to be cut and paste into every contract. So that's important. Who pays for the malpractice? I know Mitch is going to cover this in another slide too. Who pays tail coverage if it's there? And then benefits, just understand the benefits, obviously. PTO is an obvious one. Retirement plan, it's good to know what they've got. Intellectual property policy, if you've ever had any thoughts that you might want to invent something or that might be something you want to do one day, it's good to understand. If we have time at the end, I got a story about that, because I've taken one of my ideas through the invention and patent and ultimately into a business. And I had a lot of bumps along the way with regard to IP things that I had signed. So anybody else want to comment on this stuff?
To be honest with you, Pat, I kind of struggle with just the stuff that I have to do for AUGS and that kind of stuff. It's not really time off, but it's not really benefiting whoever you're working for, but it is benefiting them at the national level. And so I kind of have to work through those issues sometimes. And
right, I understand. Yeah, and so and if I understand what you're saying somewhat too, is if, let's say, you're somebody who is important on a national scale like Mitch, and you've got things that you're going to be doing that don't benefit yourself exactly, do you have to take PTO for that? Another example, this doesn't come up with you guys, but it's just, I can't think of another example that would be for you, maybe the Fellows Network or something. But if there's something that you're really into that's not exactly vacation time, right? It's work and it benefits the organization you're joining. You might get that negotiated up front, that you get extra, some kind of CME time for it, so don't be afraid to ask for something like that.
I've had a couple of institutions call it windshield time. It's time where you're having to do some traveling that's not a direct benefit to the institution, but in the long term it benefits them. And so that's one way to do it too. Yeah.
Yeah. And in my current job that I just started, this came up, because I had a number of things that I was plan on doing. And I just was saying, are these things valuable to you? Do you value these potential things that I'm going to do? And if so, does this come out of my PTO time, or how would that work? And then they usually, if they think it's a valuable thing, then they'll say, oh no, you can have extra time for that. So it doesn't hurt to ask.
I have admin time built into my schedule. So Mondays I can either add patients on or do surgeries with like a general OBGYN where we can kind of build bridges with community OBGYNs. I can work on presentations. So yeah, that was part of the contract for me as well.
Was that something that you brought up after you already knew the salary that they were offering you?
It wasn't like make or break for me in this particular position, but most of the physicians here work 4-day work weeks or 4.5 day. And so that extra time you can like chart, or one of the reasons I was hired here is to help to expand the practice. And so they wanted to make sure I had time to do presentations that wasn't for general OBGYN groups or urology groups or colorectal groups, neurology I've done. And they didn't want that to take away from patient time. So that was in the contract.
So they probably had that in mind when they were putting the package together originally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Contract negotiations. These days, it's really important you know what EHR you're going to be working on. As we all know, EHR kind of slows things down depending upon which product you're using. You need to know, you need to understand what an RVU is. And unfortunately, I'm afraid most fellows coming out of fellowship don't quite understand that. Actually, we're doing some RVU talks this year for the virtual AUGS meeting, but you definitely got to understand that. You need to understand what you're comparing when you're looking at contracts. So most of these contracts are set up now. Pat, tell me if I'm not correct. Most of them are a base, and then they have an incentive RVU production type program. And I'm guessing that's what you were looking at, Jessica.
For the most part, it sort of depended, but yeah, for the most part, that's true.
So you got to understand, well, if I'm going to be getting this, what do I have to do to get this? And that's what the RVU is. It basically is just a simple measure of production. Your EHR can affect that. Your people who code for you can affect that. So you need to understand, are you doing the direct coding? If not, do you know who your coder is? So you're speaking the same language that they're writing down that is a measure of your productivity. Those are all kind of things. And then the best way to handle this is when you're negotiating through this or getting specific, ask them, what is the typical RVU production for the people that you're going to be joining? Be sure you kind of think you understand what you're going to be doing. That also gives you an idea of how hard the people are working and how hard they're going to expect you to work. And then we've all kind of touched on this already. You got to love where you're going, because that's where you're going to be. Location, location, location.
Yeah, that's so true. And then some of the finer points to try to ask about with RVUs, there's typically going to be a dollar amount assigned to the RVUs, something like anywhere from $45 to $60 per RVU over and above your base number that you're expected to do. And then they'll typically benchmark that against some survey, like the
MGMA data.
Yeah, MGMA is real common. They'll take whatever one makes it, the hardest for you to make money, and they'll use that's the one that you'll be using.
That's right.
And it's so, at the 50th percentile they pay X, and at the 75th percentile they pay X. But there's some details there that are different from place to place that are interesting. So if you do a surgery and you bill 4 procedure codes, they all have an RVU assigned to it, but you don't get paid the full amount for each RVU. They discount the amount of cash you get. And so I've even seen some places where they follow that and they discount the amount of RVUs you get, but then somebody says don't. That makes a massive, massive difference. You really need to understand. And it's one of these things where you want to ask the question, but don't ask it too well, because you don't want to give them any ideas either. So I would say if they just say, let me just add up the RVUs, and you say, oh yeah, of course, good. But that's real good. Yeah.
So I have a question, And this is about if you are right out of fellowship and you're a new hire, does it look bad to be negotiating for things like admin, conference time, research time, that sort of thing? Does it make it look bad on you?
I think, go ahead, Pat, you start.
I was just going to say, as long as I would let them do the talking first, right? It's always better if you let somebody else give you the offer first, and then you're working from that. And so it depends on how you do it, right? I mean, if you're somebody that's you've got a real idea, you've had some seed money, and you've got a research study, and you very well might get an NIH grant out of this, or the chances are decently high, and that's something that your organization really values, then you say, listen, I need to make the money, but I also need a day or two a week to do this, because you might be looking at a $2 million NIH grant, right? And so that's different than if you say, I'm a big thinker and I need a day a week to think on my research. And they say, what research? And you say, I don't know yet. I haven't been thinking yet. You know, I mean, like, that's totally different. So what were you going to say, Mitch?
I was going to say, know the culture of your employer. I mean, they're not going to want to get someone who's mostly clinical, and you're just doing clinical work. They're not going to want to give you admin time. They're going to say, hey, this is part of working, you know, calling patients back, doing that kind of stuff. That's what you do.
And that is what you do, right? I mean, Jessica, when I made the comment about yours, it's a good life balance, and it's a thing that's probably attractive. It's probably something they do to attract young people to work there, but it's all probably factored in. It's it would have been, and then it's actually kind of giving you extra, right? Because if you decide you want to work during those times, then I assume you make more money too. So,
yeah, and that's something to look at in different contracts. So like, what is your guarantee? And then if you overproduce during your guarantee, what happens? Does that money just go to the practice, or do you get that money on top of your guarantee? Where I am, it's a percentage. So 4 times a year, they look at what I'm producing. If I'm producing less, I personally don't owe that back. In some cases, that is, you should know that if that's going to be the practice you're joining. So you make the guarantee, and then you could potentially make a bonus on top of that based on how many RVUs you're doing during the guarantee. So something else to look into. Yep.
Just kind of going down this list, the term of the contract is really important. I mean, 2 years is fine. 18 months is probably not enough. And 3 years is great. If you get a 3-year guarantee, that's really nice. Guarantees are important because there's so many things that are going to make your productivity and cash not match up, right, for a while, because it takes a while for insurance plans to even recognize you. It takes a while for you to build a business. Most people, a good benchmark is if you're in the black at 18 months, that's about average. That's about par. So and when you're fiscally in the black, that's when you can start earning these bonuses people have, or you start to, you know, just make what you earn, essentially, especially if you're on a cash collections type contract. So 2-year guarantee is pretty standard. 3 years is really nice. Next thing on the list, you know, CME time and money. They're going to probably have a set thing, but I mentioned it before. If you've got some extra things that you're doing that would sort of be like CME, or you have some, I guess, honors or awards that you're doing, you know, and they're over and above, and but you want to say something like, I want to go to AUGS every year because that's important for my career, but then I've got these other things that I've been asked to do. Think I could get extra time for that? And most places, if it's something that they're going to be proud of, they'd say yes. Oftentimes the related goals to the bonus structure can be widely variable. I mean, in fact, most of the time I've had people just say, why don't you write out your goals that make sense? And what they're really trying to do is just give you the highest amount of bonus. And you write things that look good, but you're 100% chance that you're going to hit them, right? And so don't miss the opportunity to do something like that. What I mean by moonlighting work is not work as a practicing doctor. Nobody's going to let you do something like that. But let's say medical legal expert work, or being a consultant to a device company, or a consultant to some other kind of company. The further you're out and the more people you talk to, you're going to have these opportunities. And my opinion's always been that as long as you're doing all the work that they hired you to do and working as hard as you can and doing the right thing for them, that they don't own 100% of your time, so nights and weekends, you ought to be able to do, as long as you disclose what you're doing, you ought to be able to do what you want and make that money on the side. Some places factor it in and they take a percentage. Some places just say, sure, do that as long as, you're being careful and not doing it on our time. So I'll go through all these and then I'll hear your other comments. This one I'm very interested in what Mitch has to say, pathway to partnership. I think if you're getting really serious with a small group or maybe even a multi-specialty group, understanding what does it mean to be a partner and how would I get there and what does that look like and who was the last one and what was their path? Because that seems to be a highly nebulous situation, and understandably so, because you're bringing somebody on and you're hoping they're going to work out and you have no idea whether they would wind up being your partner or what that even means sometimes. So very, very, very often you can get your moving expenses covered. I mean, that's, if they didn't put it up front, you can, if you ask, somebody's going to say yes to that. Typically they'll even have a set amount that they usually give. And then one important one is any chance you get to see the space and meet the people that you're going to be working with, or get the guarantee that you get to hire the people that you're directly working with. And that's going to be your job once you start. But especially that space, because employers can't give back space when they have it leased, and they can't typically get rid of employees very easily. So these are things that they're going to be very cautious about. So, and they may not want to tell you exactly where you're going to work, but you kind of want to push back on that and understand, because where you're actually practicing, the physical space is very important. And then obviously understanding the frequency and the type of call. We're, as urogynecologists, I remember, a couple years into it, just talking to some of my buddies and saying, I never thought of it this way, but we don't have emergencies, right? We landed in the field without emergencies. So, it's nice if you don't have to take on call when you never had call to begin with, and you don't do anything that, honestly, if they called me right now to go to the ER at Cornell, I'd say, uh-oh, where's that? I need you to tell me how to get there. So,
I've been called into the ER one time in the last 2 years, and it was just, total prosedention. They couldn't get it back in and they were panicking. That's about it.
Well, and it is different for each job, definitely. So that's to look into. So I took this job knowing that I would be taking some weekend call. I share it with, there are 2 urogynecologists, including me, and then there are 3 gyne oncologists, which is kind of a turnoff to a lot of urogynes that I'm taking oncology call some weekends. But our PAs also take call, and so I personally am on call every 8th or 9th weekend, where I take call from Friday night to Monday morning, and I'm not like changing oncology plans. I'm kind of just rounding and keeping them alive, to be honest. But for me, the trade-off is annoying. You get some chemo questions over the weekend that I have to like up to date once in a while, but otherwise I'm off the other weekends. So there are other jobs that require some OB call I've heard of for urogyne jobs, or general GYN call. So that's definitely something to know when you are negotiating your contract or even just looking for a position.
Definitely. There's general GYN call.
Go ahead, Pat. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Before I forget, I'm going to forget. There's general GYN call on the job that I just took, and I don't mind that. So I guess I might show up at the ER during that, at this new place. And I didn't mean to suggest that I'm not on call. In fact, it can be a little bit of a trick or a negotiation point. When I started at a different job, I was the only one that did what I did. And, when they were talking about call, I said, well, I'm on call 365, 24/7 for my practice. So isn't that enough call? And that worked. But of course, call for me, I could be on call anywhere in the world and treat UTIs, right? So, that's a thing you can remember too, that offering up the fact that you'll be on call for yourself 100% of the time is not such a bad thing.
Pat, do you know anyone who's in with the urology group? I've always been interested in how do they do it with urologists.
That's the best. So it's me. I'm in the department of urology. So
okay.
I don't have any ability to take urology call, right? I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm only on call for myself. This is what I'm talking about is
okay.
I'm on call for myself 100% of the time, but I'm not in the call pool for urology.
Okay.
I do know someone who graduated with me 2 years ago who is in the Bay Area. There was not a UroGyn position. She joined a larger urology group, and it's the same situation. So she's on call. She actually shares, so they share her call, but she doesn't take their urology call. So
That's nice.
yeah.
What about things that you've seen about the, I guess,
partner.
side
Pathway
hustle?
to partner? The pathway to partner, is that what you were saying?
Oh yeah, I'm very interested in what you have to say about that.
So I think for anyone who's thinking they're going to go into a small group and move into a partnership, Pat alluded to, when was your last partner here? You don't want to be involved with something that's like an Amway program where it's pyramid. And you can a lot of times tell because they're going to want you to buy into receivables. In other words, that's money that's owed to the group. And they're going to want you to buy into that. And they're also going to want you to pay a lot of post-tax dollars when you buy in. Post-tax dollars, you're buying goodwill. Pre-tax dollars, you can buy depreciable assets with. And this is all IRS stuff, but that pre-tax versus post-tax dollar, how you buy into that really can give you some indications of what to look for. I would also ask them, what do you get paid when you're a partner? Because a lot of times the people who've just been hired are making more than what the partners are. And even though you have ownership, things like viruses and stuff go bad, and as a partner, you're the one that has to take the hit a lot of times.
Boy, that's the truth. And then also there's the practice that you're talking about, but then it could be that the practice owns a building that has other tenants, and that's like one of the real money generators. And if you don't know that or bring it up, they'll never bring it up. And that's something you'll miss completely. And I'm not saying that you deserve an opportunity to be a partner in that, but it's just good to know the lay of the land, and because it helps you understand what their motivations are.
Absolutely. Paula, is there a question down there, Paula?
Yes, there is. So the question is, when you first get hired on, do you have any advice if you want to have a baby in the first year or two of practice, and how that might affect your RVUs and, making good on your new position? And how do you discuss that with your new employer?
I just had a baby, so maybe I can answer that. But of course, it's unique to my situation. But so I'm in a place where you have the guarantee for 2 years. I did find out after I started working here, does that extend the 2 years for the time that I took off for maternity leave, or is that included in the 2 years? For me, it's included, but for other friends of mine who have had kids in the first few years, they just say, okay, you're taking the 3 months off, and then we'll just extend the guarantee for 3 months. I also am in California, where there is paid baby bonding time, which is a little bit different than other states. So knowing what's going on in each state is also, I think, helpful to know. I also talked to other people, not UroGyns, that are in this large multi-specialty group, but other general OBGYNs and urologists who had kids in the first 2 years. And according to them, it's actually the better time to do it, because then you're not RVU based. So you actually are maybe making more money during your maternity leave, during your guarantee, than you potentially would make during your leave after the guarantee.
Okay, there's another question too. What can you expect from your new employer to help build your practice in those first few years?
I like that question. The short answer is not too much, and that's okay. I mean, they're going to do things that they do for everybody. They're going to send out whatever their usual, blurb is on the internet, and maybe they're into social media now, and there'll be some of that. If they're really slick, then they might have somebody who helps you get in front of the people that are going to be your referring sources by, maybe now these days it'll be Zoom calls, or maybe it'll be meet and greets some other way. I always ask to be hooked up with grand rounds type things. So that'll do it. Now, I use this example a lot. It's kind of silly, but I have heard people that they want to, something grand, like a billboard or something put up, and don't expect big money marketing. I mean, it's great if they do it for you, but really it's a grassroots thing. And people, employers really like people who, make their own practice and get busy because they've done a grassroots thing. And, you know, I've done this multiple times now in my career, and it's always exactly the same. You know, your referring doctors are like a faucet. You want to turn that faucet on and leave it on. And the way you leave it on is do a good job, make sure they understand, communicate extremely well, one by one, get to know them, and then move on to the next one and keep those relationships flowing. And the hospital can't do that for you. So unless you're in some sort of situation where people are sort of captive and they got to send it to you, you know, and I don't even know the organization, but Kaiser seems like it might be like that, where, you know, if you're the Uruguayan, they're going to send it to you. That's different. But a lot of places people can send wherever they want, and you have to build these relationships yourself, and think of it as gravy, whatever the organization can do for you. I think that's the best way to go into it anyway. What do you guys think?
Pat, I would agree with you 100%. In fact, I think anyone who's going into an area, especially if you're the first Uruguayan, you ought to just get your group, whoever's hired you, say, hey, pay for the food of a lunch and do a lunch for a multi-specialty group. Let them see you, let them see how you interact with people, let them ask you questions. And I agree with Pat. It's all that word of mouth, people trusting you to take care of their patients. And even though it's not glamorous, it'll get you a lot of patients pretty quick.
And don't miss the chance. This isn't really supposed to be part of this talk, but a couple things. Don't miss the chance to ask every single grateful patient, you know, whether it be willing to post something online, because those things add up pretty fast, and it's hugely beneficial to have nice online ratings from grateful patients, obviously. And then another one that people don't always think of is every single hospital has some kind of weekly OR meeting where all the anesthesiologists and all the people that work in the operating room get together, and they need lectures, and give them a lecture, give them more than one lecture. You know, hey, I'm new here, I do things a little different, show them some cool videos, teach them about prolapse and incontinence, because if you look around that room, they're going to be 80% female, most likely. And in every one of those people's circle of friends, they're the medical expert. Mm-hmm. So it's an incredibly powerful way to get busy fast, is to make this big group of experts think you're the one. And then anybody that asks them, they start giving your name. That works really well.
Yeah. Good point.
So a follow-up question to that is, which website do you have your patient write reviews on?
All of them. So you rotate it, have a little postcard with the, what is it called, a QR, a little scanny thing, and the link. And if you pay attention to what you're doing on those different sites, if you get low, or you say you need more on the Google than you do on Health Grades, then start giving out the Google one. You know, just you have to pay a lot of attention yourself to this kind of stuff.
Jessica, do you want to bring up your slides?
Sure, there's some crossover, so let me see if I can bring this up here.
And then while you're doing that, another thing that's coming up is...
I think you have to unshare, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Another question is, we talked a little bit on urology practice versus an OBGYN practice. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Speak a little bit more to that. Say that again. If urology versus urogyn?
Yeah, being involved with a larger OBGYN versus a larger urogyn practice.
So there are like 1,100 physicians in the practice where I am. So it's a large group. So they're urologists, general OBGYN. So I don't have great experience of creating a urogyn position at a separate urology group. I certainly could I have my email at the end of this. I can get you in touch with someone who's done that for herself. But I don't have, if there isn't a position open, I haven't done that yet.
The thing I hear
negative things about that. I've heard a lot of fits and starts when you put about 50 urologists together and then they hire a urogynecologist. It feels to them like a no-brainer that this person's going to get busy, but not necessarily so. You know, most of my referrals come from OBGYNs and from primary care. It's about a 50-50 mix, and urogyn's getting to be something that people know about. So folks don't always think of a urology practice as a place to go, and patients don't always make that connection either. So be careful. If you're thinking of joining a big urology group, like one of these mega groups, make sure that you ask them how they know they're going to get these patients. And if they're talking demographics of the community or something, that's different than if they're talking about, well, we have them coming now and we don't know what to do with them. That's a better answer.
Think about if you were a patient, would you want to walk into a urology waiting room and be one woman sitting around 30 old men?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of have to think like that to some degree. So it's got to be the right setup for sure.
If they can't answer that question really well in the urology group, how am I going to get busy? How do you see this working? How did you model that? Then you might want to stay away.
All right, Jessica.
Okay. So disclosure, definitely not an expert. I've had multiple jobs in the past, but this is my only FPMRS job. So I'm not an expert. I've just done it most recently, or maybe not most recently if Pat's done it more recently than me. Let's see. So my husband and I sat down together, and my job journey really just started with what is important to us. And the number one thing was to find an FPMRS position. And then the details kind of followed after that. So similar to the other slides, location for us was very important. Again, my husband followed me around for the last 10 years. And so it was important to him to come back to the Bay Area where he used to work for his finance connections for his job. So location for us happened to be very important. Like now with the pandemic, my whole family is in Wisconsin and his whole family is in Illinois. So something to consider, like what is your support system in the location that you're looking for, especially with a newborn. Maybe being closer to family during a pandemic would have been helpful, but we still are happy with our location choice. So a few details, some of this is crossover, some of it's a little bit different. So location to us was number one. Type of practice we've already sort of gone through, and the partnership opportunities. For me, it was like, what is the patient population? I was at a county hospital for a vast majority of my fellowship program. Did I want to stay in that type of practice? Or, you know, I did actually, I really liked my patient population. I'm in a pretty different practice now in the peninsula of the Bay Area. What type of diagnoses are being seen in clinic? So what gap is needing to be filled in the clinic? Are you the only urogyn in a urology group or an OBGYN group? Or are you joining a group where there's already a robotic specialist and they're looking for someone to do things vaginally or laparoscopically, or is there a FI specialist, or are you the new FI specialist? Or my favorite, like, are you the new IC specialist, which sometimes happens. That's for some people for sure. But that I have heard of that, not for my friend in the area, but someone who joined a urology group, like they saw quite a bit of IC for the first 2 years.
May I say something quickly about that?
Yes.
Be really careful. If you've learned you know, pelvic pain skill set and IC skill set, and people hear about it, and the patient groups hear about it, you can quickly inundate your practice. And I've seen it happen to people where 1 or 2 years into their practice, they're seeing 60-70% of that stuff because those patients need a place to go, and I feel terrible for them. But that's a good way to really hurt yourself financially, and probably, unless that's your goal. But if it's not your goal, you got to be a little careful with that.
Yeah, totally agree. Just figuring out what the needs are of the practice and seeing if your goals fit into that. So for me personally, obviously we're trained in IC, and I do feel bad because there aren't other places for these patients to go where they've seen multiple people before. So the way we worked it into my schedule is I have 2 slots in my day that I can see IC patients. So sometimes their wait list is a little bit longer than someone who has prolapse or stress incontinence. But there were days in the beginning, like 2 years ago, where I would see like 10 new IC patients, and it just was kind of taking over the practice. So we've had to space it out. And for us, that worked out to limit the number per day. We talked about earlier the staff or admin support. So that's something that you hear about, but I've learned firsthand in the first 2 years that that's really important. So there's been a lot of turnover. We have 2 PAs, and for lots of different reasons, but mostly because of cost of living where I live, there's been like extreme turnover, which slows our practice down quite a bit every time we have to like retrain a new PA. So I don't know how you would necessarily change that, but kind of figuring out who works in the office and what turnover situation may be like for staff members, but also turnover for the department. Has there been a new chair of the department, or, you know, like what have the changes been and how would that maybe affect a new position? I don't know if anyone has experience with that.
Corollary to that, I would add, is when you're looking at your ancillary services like physical therapy, urodynamics, how's that being reimbursed to you? Are you getting a part of that revenue, or is that going out to the Bladder Health Network, or you know, something like that? So
very, very true. That's a really good detail to know. And if the RVUs are going through your practice, or the cash collections are going through your practice, understand whether you're getting the interpretation component or the global component. And yeah, very important.
And then we mentioned research opportunities and support. So again, I'm in private practice. There are very few. It exists because there are people that are doing research at our organization, but you definitely are making less RVU. So how does that get compensated in your contract if that's something that's important to you? If, like it's been said earlier, if you are okay doing research because you kind of had to as a fellow, but it's not necessarily the direction you want to go for your career, like don't highlight that during your interview. We have interviewed people over the last few years who, like, that's all they want to talk about is their research. And like, I feel like they're not really reading the crowd. Like that's not exactly what our organization, their top priority. So something to know when you're going into interviews and when you're sending your CVs out, like you've mentioned before. For me, relationship with other departments has been important. So in fellowship, we had a pretty clear understanding. We worked really closely with the urologist. I'm on the gynecology side. But when I came into private practice, I realized actually there's sometimes a struggle for RVUs or past relationships that didn't go very well, where the urologist or gynecologist thought that urogyn was taking over part of their practice. So in private practice, that has played out for me in doing some lectures. If I'm asked to do a lecture for, I did a lecture for the neurology group here. I actually just invited one of the urologists that's in our group to do it with me so that we can kind of build bridges and they see it more collaborative and less competitive. And now they actually send me all their stress incontinence, which I'm fine with. I'm surprised, but I'm okay with it. Same thing goes with like the colorectal surgeons in your area or group, physical therapy, and just what the relationships are like. And are you being brought in, like I was, maybe to work on some of these relationships? Oh, another thing that's different for me out of fellowship and in private practice is I was used to working with other fellows and residents. People would send us patients and we would do their surgeries. And now in practice, maybe about 30% of the time I'm doing the case either with the urologist who sent the patient to me or with the general OBGYN. So they might do the vaginal hysterectomy part and I assist them, and then I assist them on the uterosacral ligament suspension. That can get a little dicey when you're talking about RVUs, but I'm really working on building relationships and meeting these groups. And so that's been a way that I've been able to do that during my guarantee.
Then it's good to transition away from that as soon as you can. It's trickier each time. You got to figure out, and sometimes you just have to have a frank discussion with the people and say, you know, this is, I don't know, it's a tough discussion, but I've had it plenty of times where, but usually people are honorable and they know that you're doing the whole case and you don't need them and they need you, and then they just sort of fade away once they know that you're taking good care of their patients.
And that's even what's happened in the last 2 years for the majority of the time. And then obviously, are you working with residents, med students, fellows, nurse practitioners, and PAs, and what that relationship is like, or what your expectations are? We've gone through a lot of the compensation and benefits discussion. I don't know if I have anything else. So here in California, you're not legally allowed to have a non-compete clause, but there are some like restrictive covenants. I'm not a legal person, so I don't necessarily know the big difference, but basically I can't put my face on a big billboard within a mile of the hospitals where I currently work if I were to leave this position. But knowing what the restrictions are, I also can't bring staff members with me if I were to leave. That is all in the contract. And then reimbursement again for DEA licensing, all that kind of stuff, which definitely adds up. So mentorship is something else to consider, especially when you're fresh out of fellowship. Are you joining a practice where you're totally on your own and you're making all of the decisions and doing all the surgeries? Who are you doing these surgeries with? Again, is it a generalist? Is it a partner, a junior partner? Or like I'm mostly operating with PAs, which has been a little bit of an adjustment, but so far a good one. If I'm not doing it by myself. So things to kind of know for that practice. And then who is making decisions in the group? So sometimes they say things during the interview that's not actually how decisions are actually made, but is it you, like you're the decision maker, you get to decide how many patients you see for the day or what new equipment you buy, or is it a board or a large organization, and how do these decisions get made if you are looking to add or improve or change things in your practice? Schedule, we kind of talked a little bit about. My call schedule is weird because I do take gyne-oncology call, but again, then I'm off like 8 weekends in a row, and then I'm on one terrible weekend. What your typical daily schedule is like, that kind of plays into what happens after your guarantee is done. So does that mean you have to see 50 patients in clinic in order to make your guaranteed salary once the guarantee is done? And how many patients are typically being seen by the other urogynes if there are other urogynes in your group? I'm working full-time, which is considered full-time, but I'm doing 4-day weeks. Some people are interested in job sharing or part-time work, so that's good to know if that is potential where you are joining.
Hey, Jessica. Yeah, so did you ever interview where they actually talked about how they would logistically do job sharing?
They are, you know, where they sometimes actually at the interview, they brought it up. Someone in the practice had been interested in job sharing, but I didn't get into logistics. I was looking for a full-time position.
So there is a question on that. Do any of you have examples of people that have done job sharing, and what does that actually mean?
Closest thing I can think of is I've known some urogynes who just didn't want to go to the OR, didn't want that part of their life, and they just wanted to do the office, and you know, that's the kind of job sharing that could sort of work. Otherwise, I don't know of a situation.
From the employer's perspective, they're thinking about two liabilities insurance, and that kind of, you know, double the expenses. So they're trying to figure out how are we going to generate these revenues. You know, you got to look at it from their perspective also.
Yep. And another question, Jessica, you talked about how many people you see a day, how often you operate, how often you're on call. Can the three of you just give a description of how many patients you do see in a day, in-office procedures, how often you operate in a month, the more details of what your day actually looks like?
Sure, I can. Oh, go ahead, Pat.
No, go ahead. I'm in the midst of a ramp up, so I'd have to talk about the past. So talk about what you're doing now. Okay,
so I have Monday admin time, but sometimes I add, like this week I added surgeries on Monday. I have 2 days in the operating room. So I have 1 surgery center day, 1 day where I'm doing more major cases in the hospital setting, and then I have 2 full days of clinic. And on my full clinic days, it varies depending with COVID stuff. We've had to minimize how many patients are in the waiting room, so it's a little bit different now. But in general, I'm seeing somewhere between like 12 and 20 patients a day in clinic.
I'll go next, Pat. So in private practice, it's all about the margin. So I don't have these big blocks of time where I'm in a certain facility. I cover 3 different hospitals. I operate at 7 in the morning, and then I start seeing patients at 8:30. I operate at 12, and I start seeing patients at 1:30 in the afternoon. I usually see 12 in the morning and 12 to 14 in the afternoon, 1 or 2 new patients in the morning, 1 or 2 in the afternoon. I have an advanced nurse practitioner who does my urodynamics. I'm right outside the room. If I need to system, I walk in right there. If she's struggling with what's going on, I walk in right there in between patients. I mean, it's pretty much wide open the entire time. We don't work Friday afternoons. We quit Friday at 12, but other than that, we work Monday through Friday. In my typical day, I'm usually done by 6:30 or 7 at night.
That sounds very much like what I do, although I've been more into scheduling block surgery days where I'll operate for a really long day. And then but my office days are kind of like Mitch just said. When I'm doing the business like I want to, and not right now, I'm in the ramp up at a new place, but that's what I'm shooting for, is right around maybe somewhere between 20, 24 patients a day, 8 of which are new patients. And we haven't talked about nurse practitioners or PAs, but my thing is, I think I need to see every new patient, and I need to see post-ops and do procedures in the office, but everything else, the physician extenders should probably be doing, from a business standpoint anyway.
Yeah. And that's how there are 2 urogyns and we have 2 PAs. So they are either operating with us as our assist, or they're seeing patients in clinic. So my 12 to 20 patients a day, I actually see somewhere between 7 and 15 new patients out of that. So they're a little bit longer appointments because I'm not doing the pessary checks, I'm not doing med follow-ups, I'm not doing like interstim follow-up, those kind of things. So our PAs are doing a lot of that. I see one of the post-ops, I see them at 2 weeks, and then our PAs see them 4 weeks after that.
Hey, Jessica, do you know what your RVU production is? I mean, are they keeping up with you on that?
They do. So we have a website where.
I don't mind sharing that, yeah.
Like my numbers?
Well, like MGMA will give most urogyns or most OBGYNs, you can buy their data to find out what a typical urogyn RVU production is for a year in terms of work RVU. So I'm just wondering.
Sure. So we have this because it's this big group. So you can actually check daily to see, and I got a little bit OCD and was like definitely checking daily for a while, just as I didn't have a lot of training in fellowship. So I knew what an RVU was, but I didn't really know how that translated to an actual practice. So you can check daily, and then you can check in with the coders to make sure that they coded correctly once you kind of know what's going on, which I definitely do. Because you can find spaces where there actually mistakes have been made or changes can be made. So it depends on the month, but like RVUs that I'm making right now, again, I'm during my guarantee, and it's kind of weird because I just got back from maternity leave, but somewhere in the 5 to 750-ish range of RVUs per month.
Okay. Part of the reason I bring this up is when you finish your fellowship, you don't realize the importance of valued time. And so if it's taking you 3.5 hours to do a straight stick ASC, you're really only getting paid for about 2 hours of that. And you kind of have to learn where you are in terms of your productivity, and you got to keep up with that, especially if you're on any kind of model. Pat, are you agreeing with that?
Oh, totally. I completely agree with that. You don't want to create time sinks where you've lost for the day. I agree with that.
The block scheduling thing, I do it some depending upon the types of cases, but if your OR turnover time is 1 hour and 15 minutes, that's time that you're not getting paid for. And if it's taking you longer to do what a normal procedure would do, you're actually losing money there too. So you have to be real careful with your blocks and that kind of stuff.
That's a great point. So I can completely understand why you have the OR schedule that you mentioned, because that would be absolutely maximizing your time.
It's maximum efficiency. Admittedly, though, you're eating junk food in between cases, and I mean, you're living like a resident. What you're doing, but.
Talking about RVUs, you have talked about MGMA a few times. Can you tell us what that is?
Medical Group Management Association, I believe that's right.
That's right.
It is a nationalized association, and each state has their own chapter. And essentially, they keep up with a lot of the fiscal and productivity models, data. They send out surveys every year to all the different practices. They help us now. They're starting to help us figure out practice expenses, and it's kind of a different way of looking at things, but it gives you pretty objective data, and most of the employers use this data, and so it's kind of good to at least be familiar with it to some degree.
Jessica, do you have another slide?
let's see. And just obviously a good fit. Like, when you interview with the people, does it seem it's kind of like a marriage, that you spend quite a bit of time, maybe even more time than you do with your spouse or significant other sometimes? So does it seem like a good fit? And are there huge red flags? And if there are, then probably trust your gut, because it probably will just get worse when you join the practice. We talked about timing for next steps. So I started the beginning of my second year talking. I joined mailing lists like AUGS, ACOG. I spoke to recruiters. I did speak to some of the device reps in our area who had some connections. I really spoke with any and all connections because location was so important to us. So I talked to past fellows, friends of friends, friends of mentors. I had some of my mentors reach out to people to make some connections. And then once I was getting closer in the job search, I talked to some general OBGYNs who are already part of this group to see what their experience is, even though it will be slightly different than mine as a Urogyn, or urologists that are in the group or area, even to figure out like patient population, reputation, those kind of things, how the organization has treated them. And then my job was posted, so I'm not, again, an expert in this, but there are people who are starting their own practice who I know, actually 2 people in Los Angeles who've done that in the last few years that are more recent grads, or advocating for larger hospital systems of why there should be an FPMRS trained person at their organization. So talking first with OBGYNs in the area and urologists or current urogyns who are there, and then maybe the department chair. I've heard of some people going straight to the department chair, and that's sort of been controversial with some of the OBGYNs or urologists who are doing some of those similar procedures. So maybe getting some buy-in from urologists or OBGYNs in the area before going to the department chair. Or if you have a connection, going straight to them. And then I just have my email, so if anyone has questions, you can feel free to email me as you're working on your job applications.
Great, thank you. So we have 2 more questions. And so the first one is, do you have recommendations for finding out what portion of clinical collections support academic administration? And is this usually negotiable?
I'm going to say this is a pet peeve of mine. When you go out into the private practice, into the business world, everything's pretty transparent. Everyone knows what they're going to be making. And if you ask the right questions, you can find out anything. But in the academic world, everything seems to change from institution to institution. And I kind of feel like it's the Wizard of Oz. It's who's behind the curtain making those decisions. Pat, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I muted myself for a second because there's planes and birds around here, but that's 100% true. You know, academic institutions are the worst for that. Everybody's got their own kind of side deal, and you're unlikely to ever peel back all the layers of that onion, you know? So you just need to understand your own value. And one thing I have done over the years that I think is helpful is you can develop a small group of, you know, friends where you really tell the truth to each other about how much money you're making and what kind of things you're doing to try to get more or different sort of benefits. I've got a few guys like that and women, and we are truly honest with each other. Because, by the way, most people aren't. I think most people exaggerate their salary. I think it's a natural thing people must do all the time. And you know, so don't be wigged out if you think you're if you hear a lot of times that people are making a lot more money than you would have expected. But a small group of people where you can bounce things off of each other, and you have a contract negotiation coming up, and you're willing to share details about your situation. You know, it's not going to be a lot of people. I got like 5 people like that, but that's a key thing.
Excellent point.
And then, go ahead, Mitch.
No, I kind of wish I could get AUGS to think about us trying to survey institutions and see if they would possibly open up enough to give a little bit of data to fellows coming out, because they really, every place seems to be different significantly. So I don't know, just thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then this is just the last question, and then we can wrap it up. I want to respect people's time, and I know that it's already after 8 o'clock. But given COVID, should new hires be expected to take lower pay and benefits when they're looking? And then also, do you think there's going to be a tighter job market for these graduating fellows?
I think there's got to be a tighter job market because every hospital is looking at, you know, tens of millions of dollars that they lost during the main part of the COVID that we're not even out of, right? So it's still a moving target for them. But what I said near the start of this was what I think is the key, and the way your message ought to be is, you know, you're a profit center as a urogynecologist, and they need, I mean, they can cut costs all they want, but that's not going to solve their money problem. Their money problem is only solved by revenue and increasing revenue. And that's what we are. So keep that in mind and try not to take the hit, you know, financially for it, is what I think.
You know, before we started the conference here, Pat and I and Jessica were talking. There's been some movement for employers to put a paragraph in contracts now, and it's called force majeure. It's MAJEURE, and basically it means acts of God. And it's a lot of companies and systems are putting these in contracts now because they don't want to get burned for another thing like this to come out in the future. And so when you're looking at contracts, kind of be sure you understand that. You have the ability to negotiate that some, you know, maybe offering to change a venue to help them during a hard time, or maybe agreeing to work more hours during these hard times to try to recoup some of the revenues that are lost. But the question that regarding the job market, I think you've got, especially in light of the virus, you got to be willing to kind of look at that closely.
And do you think they'll be offered lower pay and decreased benefits?
I'm not sure that we'll see a huge drop in pay. I do think there's going to be a huge incentive for more productivity.
Yeah.
I would say start the search earlier, because there are people who have just graduated who still haven't signed contracts because it was in the midst of COVID stuff. So it kind of adds like an extra layer of more recent fellow graduates who are still looking for positions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, all of you. Thanks to the fellows for joining us tonight. And I hope to see you all in person sometime.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Good night.
Much.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night, everybody.